it's Holly, and today I'm going to be giving you my top tips for how to get a level 7 in the IB HL Language and Literature course. So I just finished the IB Diploma program and I got a 7 in HL Lang and Lit, so I thought I'd share kind of those best tips that helped me get through it. Basically, the course takes place over 3 semesters and it's all based on English, language, and literature. So you study some literary texts like books and plays and poems, and then you study some other language-based things like speeches, etc. So if you know much about the Lang and Lit course, you know that there's something called the IOC, the Individual Oral Commentary. And I made an entire video just dedicated to how to succeed on the IOC, so if you're looking for that, I have a link in the description box and also it'll be linked above. So let's continue with paper 1. So for paper 1, you're first going to have to get really good at annotating. So this is something you can practice in class and you can also practice on your own. So of course, getting ready for the IOC is what really helped me get better at annotating. But other things like annotating poems, I did my extended essay actually on poetry, so I got really good at really analyzing those poems in depth. But really annotating anything, learn to just take a pen, sit down, and then write all over a text. So you identify everything. You identify all those literary terms. So let's get into what are all those things that make up text. So we have, in my English class, we identified it as TAP plus C plus M. So T stands for text type, so that's what you're going to want to talk about in your paper 1. The text type of whatever you're reading, so whether it be an article or an essay or a diary. Then you have audience, and audience is whoever is reading it. Then you have the purpose, and the purpose is why is it being written. So if it's a speech, for example, it could be persuasive. If it's some sort of brochure, it might be informative, so that's the purpose. And then C is going to be context, so that's things about the time period in which the piece was written. So that's things like women's rights or LGBT rights or technology that's being invented, or things like environmentalism or wars or all those types of things that kind of happen to spark the writing of text like this. So that's context, and there are often pretty good indications of what the context is. And then the other thing is the main message. So what is the text trying to convey? For me, I would suggest looking at past papers for this, because there's some really good past papers out there. You just search up IB Resource Repository and you can find all of the different past papers that exist. And then other than past papers, you can really just pick out any type of text, go online and search up newspaper articles, poems, then just sit down and practice it. You should be doing this in your English class, but if you're not, then I would suggest getting these kind of resources on your own and just timing yourself and literally write down everything about it. You circle things and you put arrows, and yeah, so after you do that, you're going to end up with something like this. Because in the paper 1, you have to compare 2 different types of texts. So they might be the same text type, they might be the same message, blah, blah, blah. They have similarities, but they also have differences. So you're going to read your text and you're just going to annotate it. You annotate the heck out of that thing. Then the next thing you're going to do is you write out the TAP plus C plus M. So T-A-P-C-M. And you do that with text A or C or D or whatever. A, B, one on each side. And then this is all going to be linked in the description box below, by the way. I know this video is kind of off the cuff, but all of the notes that I'm going to be showing you are in the description box in a folder in PDF format, so you can download any of them for inspiration. A lot of them won't be totally relevant to the text that you're studying, but it might be helpful to see how you can make notes in English, because a lot of people say, oh, you can't study for English. You can actually study for English. So here are things, the TAP plus C plus M, you do it in kind of a table format with text A on one side, text B on the other. Then you write a comparative main statement. And it's pretty much always in the same format. Both texts explore blah, blah, blah. However, text A does blah, 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 whereas text C does blah, 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 whatever the texts are called. You say what makes them similar, and then however, this makes them different. So that's how you do the compare and contrast in the paper 1, because it's always going to be the same, always the same question prompt that's given at the beginning, and it's just the texts that vary. So the 2 things you have to be really good at are annotating, and then pulling out the TAP plus C plus M, text type, audience, purpose, context, main message, and then writing this comparative main statement afterwards, and then making topic sentences. The way that I structure it was kind of about something about text A, then text B, then text A, then text B. So I would go back and forth having kind of a similarity difference in each one. Tone is a great one to explore in paragraphs. So here, for example, I had, to begin, text C uses a formal tone to inform North Americans regarding the problems facing commercial beekeeping. And then I have, for the second one, on the other hand, text D uses a more personal tone, so that's a contrast to the formal tone, aiming to convince British audiences to take action. So here we have a pretty layered paragraph where you're talking about formal versus personal tone. You're also going to be talking about the informative versus persuasive nature of the purpose, and then you're also going to be talking about different audiences, which would be the British versus North American. So those are the three things that I was talking about in the first and second body paragraph. So basically I've got 4 body paragraphs. The third and fourth, this one is, furthermore, text C's original print form reflects its context, enabling it to outline the theme that bees are in danger. In contrast, text D's more modern context allows it to utilize the text type of a web page to portray its main message. Your topic sentences go back and forth, A, B, A, B, 4 different body paragraphs, and you need to get in all of those things that you had in your planning table for the TAP plus C plus N. You need to get in all of the things that you kind of mention in the intro. You talk about them throughout. You talk about the tone, you talk about the audience, the purpose, the main message, and throughout all of it, you're using literary stylistic devices to support what you're talking about. And something that's really important to remember as a good tip is to talk about not only the literary devices, not only things like metaphors and similes, but you're also talking about the visuals. So you want to talk about leading lines and focal point and the use of imagery in both the text and the images that are used in it. Why would a specific text type be used, and what are the features of that text type? So that's why I have these notes here, which I summarized the format that I used for a paper 1, and I studied terminology. So this is something you don't really think about in English. You think, I'm a native English speaker, so I don't need to ever study terminology. That's just something that people study in their second language. But in my opinion, to succeed in HL language and literature, it's kind of important to also study specific terminology that you're learning that's relevant to the things you're writing. So here I have a bunch of synonyms for shows, a bunch of synonyms for transition or different transition words, and then things like modality, ethos, logos, and pathos. Those are things that you kind of need to study because there's lots of things here that I thought were really interesting. You can describe alliteration with onomatopoeic different connotations. Onomatopoeic connotations to describe alliteration is not something that would just pop into your mind if you haven't looked it over. So there's a bunch of little terminology that I've got in my notes here that I kind of thought were helpful while I was studying for the paper 1. Then something really important is to study the text types and their features. And then another thing that I like to do is make a to remember list. So after you go over and you make a ton of these, you annotate them with the things that were in the rubric, the things that were in the answer key to this paper 1. Then you make kind of a to remember note about things that you could add, specific word choices and diction that you felt would be helpful in your paper 1. So those are my tips for a paper 1. I hope that was helpful. Next, we're moving on to paper 2. So for paper 2, for me, we studied 3 books. In grade 12, we studied 3 books. We also did some for the IOC, which you'll see if you watch my video on the IOC. But for the paper 2, we did Fifth Business, The Children's Hour, and A Doll's House. So those were the 3 books that we did. And let me just give you a little tip. You only need to write about 2 books on the paper 2. I only studied 2 of the books. Of course, I love Fifth Business, but I only studied the other 2. And I know my teachers told us to study all 3, but I only studied 2, and it did not inhibit my success at all. In fact, I think it allowed me to be more successful because I was able to really analyze all of the things from those books, make really good comparisons and contrasts between the 2 books, and then I was able to come up with kind of an outline for essays that would work for almost any question. Let me explain. So whenever I read a book in class, I like to consider 4 different categories. And these 4 categories I mark in the book while I'm reading it for really useful quotes in 4 different colored sticky notes. So the first one is context, and contextual elements are the time period and the setting in which the book takes place. Then secondly, we have character, so that's things to do with main characters and secondary characters in the piece that you're reading. And then the third thing is thematic topics, so that would be things like friendship and love and identity and transformation. And then the fourth one is going to be literary devices. So these are things like metaphors and similes and things that really stick out as a use of these devices in order to better the book and move things forward. And then after that, the thing that I like to do is make this type of note here, which I have linked in the description box, like all my other notes. And then within that, I have things like, it's not a theme of gender, it's a thematic topic, or just a topic of gender, because a theme is a statement, and gender is just a word, so it's a topic. So here we have the topic of gender. Then I have the quote, who said it, the page number, and the reason that it's significant. So for example, here I have generalization. You think that I'm incapable of anything really serious, says Nora on page 120, and the significance is that the broad statement with all shows that Nora does not really have any serious relationship. You don't necessarily need to know the page number, because in your paper 2 you're not going to be writing page numbers. The thing that's important for you to know is when it takes place. So does it take place in Act 2? Does it take place before this happens or after this happens? That's the kind of thing that you're going to reference while you're putting the quote into your paper 2. So obviously you need to get some of these things memorized. So once you make kind of a big comprehensive note detailing all the quotes that you could use in your analysis, the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to make a summary note. So here I have a 2-page summary note detailing every quote that I would use in a paper 2. And I was able to get this all the way off on both sides, knowing it, like, I wouldn't say I memorized it, I just knew it. And it was because I practiced this. So here I have the context. The really important thing about a paper 2 that people forget is context. Just throw it in every once in a while. It makes sense if you're talking about specific quotes, because you're going to want to talk about women's rights or about environmental issues if it's relevant to your book. So here I have the 3 different general topics that I would use for a body paragraph in my essay. I always used perpetration of untruths, inaction of secrets, and the action of lies. So that was always my first point. Then my second point was always the transformation of one's identity. One side was self-realization in A Doll's House, and the other one was self-doubt in A Children's Hour. Then here we have conflict in relationships. So I was able to compare and contrast these 3 topics really well in my paper 2. Those topics might not be the topics that work best for you. I discovered these topics because I did practice essays in class and outside of class, and then I was able to see which of these work best with the questions that I find in IB. So I would go into the past papers, and then I would look at all of the questions, and for each paper I would try to identify 2 or 3 questions that I could use these points for when answering the question. So those are the things that you're going to want to think about while you're writing a paper 2. And then you just need to practice. So here I have practice, which is also linked in the description below. So here I would always write out my 3 points, and then I would write Doll's House on one side, The Children's Hour on the other side, and I would just do a kind of grid where I'd write the quotes that I was going to use, and then I'd write in a separate color afterwards. After I'd timed myself, I'd go back in a separate color and I'd add in those things that I'd forgotten. So I'd look back at my notes and say, what could I have added to make it that better? And then I would add it to this. So every time I wouldn't be writing out a full essay, I would just be, writing the plan for the essay. So for the FOA, I don't really have that many tips. I would say just choose a topic that inspires you and makes you feel passionate, something that you can be creative with, but just keep in mind that you don't have to be too creative. It really is just a presentation. For both of mine, I ended up doing a news report with a partner, and in one of them, actually in both of them, we were doing role plays. So that was kind of cool. In one of mine, I talked about the role of gender roles in Disney, and that was with specific text. One was a newspaper article and the other one was a video. And then I was talking about 2 different political ads and comparing and contrasting them. One of them was Canadian and one was American. So that was kind of interesting just for me to be able to compare those differences. Really, the most important thing is that you get in that good terminology, you practice a lot. Practice makes better. Practice doesn't really make perfect, because nothing's ever perfect, but if you practice your FOA a lot, I'm sure that you're going to be successful, because you know that you've got this, and then you can be confident, and that'll really show when you're doing your presentation. Finally, the last thing that you submit in the language and literature course is your written tasks. So you have a written task 1 and a written task 2, and for both of them, just keep in mind that format matters. Make it look professional, make it look like the text type you're trying to emulate so that really gets it across, because of course the things that you write really matter, but if you have a good format and it presents well, that just puts your teacher, your examiner, whoever in a really good mood. So I'll just let you guys know what I did for my written tasks, even though that I'm not going to be sharing them with the public because I want to keep that for me, if you know what I mean. So for my written task 1, that's the imaginative task. The one that I did first, and this is the one I submitted, was a pastiche to emulate Macbeth. So it was an additional chapter from Macbeth from the point of view of Lady Macbeth. So I thought this was really cool because I was able to explore a different side of her character, because Shakespeare often focuses on more patriarchal lines, if you know what I mean. Obviously there are female characters, but I really wanted to explore what Lady Macbeth was thinking when people were fighting, blah blah blah. So that was kind of what I did, and I thought it was really fun to write in a Shakespearean tone. Yeah, I know a lot of people don't like Shakespeare, but I just found that really fun to do the rhyming, and then you could use some secondary sources to get information about mythology or different allusions that Shakespeare might have used. And then the other one that I did was a magazine article based on George Orwell's Politics and the English Language. So for one of ours we had to do it about literature, the other one was language, and I ended up submitting the literature one. And then for my written task 2, the one that I submitted was about Nancy Mitford's The English Aristocracy. So I wrote an essay based on the English aristocracy in the 1950s and views on that. And then that was the one I submitted. I thought that was pretty interesting. A little dry at times, but definitely very interesting because it tied into history, and I definitely really like history. And then the second one that I did was an essay based on the representation of parents in fifth business. So I thought that was kind of cool because there are different groups that you have in literature, but you don't always explore the role of parental figures, and in fifth business especially, parents often kind of mess up their children. So that was really interesting to explore. And I think what you can gain from me just talking about my written tasks is that I really enjoyed them, and I really thought that what I was writing about was interesting. And even if you're not really an English person, or you feel like none of it is interesting, try to find something that at least sparks a little bit of passion or a little bit of creativity inside you, because that'll just make it so much easier. Yeah, that's what I gotta say about that. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it and found it helpful. If you have any other questions about how to succeed in HL language and literature, be sure to leave those in the comments below. I know a lot of this video was just me rambling on about the course. I thought it was a pretty cool course, and that's why I'm continuing to study English as well as history in university. So that'll be pretty cool. Yeah, if you're one of those people that thinks you can't study for English, just try it, and you'll see that you actually can study for English, and it makes you better for it. All of my notes for the HL Lang and Lit course are in the description box in a Google Drive folder in PDF format, so if you'd like to download any of those, feel free. They might not all be that useful to you because a lot of them are based on the specific text that I read, or they're just kind of rough notes, but I hope that what they can do is inspire you to take notes, or they can just show you how you could format your notes if you're studying for the HL Lang and Lit course. Yeah, even if you're taking SL Lang and Lit or any other English course, even if it's not IB, maybe these course tips will help you, I hope. So I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!